student coming to my office or coming to the office of somebody who works for me at the end of the semester and saying, I'm $500 short, I can't finish, I can't pay the rest of my term bill for next semester. We've been raising money against that very problem. So public access to public education for people who would not have access to public higher education in other contexts, for us, is an extremely important question. 12% of our students come from the bottom 20% of the socioeconomic structure. They are very threatened by the crisis in a way that other students obviously are not. A third of our students are the first person in their family to attend any form of higher education. More than half our students identify themselves as non-white. 80% of our students are on some form of financial aid. And I think I could demonstrate that more than half our students are bilingual, and in many, many languages. When I say that, sometimes to audiences, they say, oh yeah, Spanish. But that's actually not the case. It's many, many languages. All of those students represented in those percentages are the people most threatened. Their education, their opportunities are most threatened by the changing ratio between tuition and state subsidy. And we have a low percentage of out-of-state students, so we can't use that additional tuition to make up the difference, although we're going to try. So I would say, actually, to know how bad things are in any public research university, you really only need to have, and I'm simplifying, obviously, you really need to have only 3 numbers. You need to know what the state subsidy income is, you need to know what the tuition income is, and you need to know what other sources there might be to close the gap between the two. And every university is talking about what kinds of tools we can use to close that gap. So the first problem that is presaged by the crisis, it seems to me, is to maintain our mission as servants of the public, by which I mean not only our students who come from our states, but also the public at large, because it's their families that will benefit from and the state that will benefit from the education of the students. That seems to me the highest priority, is to maintain the educational mission. The second problem, it seems to me, and we haven't mentioned this very much, also arises from declining state support and a reliance on tuition. And that is the potential political pressure that will be mounted against the research mission of the university.
More of the teaching is done by faculty who cannot possibly aspire to tenure. Conversation number 5. My department does not have enough graduate students. My answer to this question is always, enough for what? And at bottom, the answer is usually to fill the graduate course that I teach. In many fields these days, the number of graduate students is already far beyond the capacity of any foreseeable job market to absorb. The moral hazard of producing more PhDs at a time when there are fewer and fewer jobs for them, not just because of the temporary downturn, but the previous problem, the longer-term substitution of non-tenure track for tenure track positions, is crystal clear. But as important, the monitoring of graduate programs and their possible shift toward a more student-centric model is in its infancy, but a crying need. As the books from the Carnegie Initiative on the Doctorate, Envisioning the Future of Doctoral Education and the Formation of Scholars, have made clear, it's new to some faculty that they exist for graduate students, not the other way around. The monitoring of the size, attrition rates, time to degree, and placement data of graduate programs are an essential part of this transformation toward a more student-centered education for our graduate students, and frankly for our own credibility as a place that says this is an important function for us to perform. Conversation number 6. Now that the financial situation is eroding, it's a good time to experiment with interdisciplinarity. The fiscal crisis has renewed calls for the abolition of departments, the development of problem-focused degree programs, and self-proclaimed radical changes in the way research and teaching are conducted in our universities. A good example of this type of thinking, with which I don't happen to agree, as you'll see, is Mark Taylor's recent book, Crisis on Campus, a bold plan for reforming our colleges and universities. A shift to interdisciplinarity driven by the fiscal crisis would be a disastrous mistake. One of the reassuring things about being dean of a 3-division college, natural science, social science, and humanities, is the ability to see that in general, interdisciplinarity is thriving within the essentially departmental culture. The rise of fields like bioinformatics, neuroscience, nanoscience, cognitive science, sustainability science, complex systems, behavioral economics, science and technology studies, international studies, among many, many others, suggest that problem-focused, team-based research and teaching is already upon us in a wide scale in the natural sciences, social sciences, and more technical fields of the humanities, such as linguistics and philosophy. But the model here is fundamentally disciplinary. These teams want the very best statistician, biologist, economist, psychologist, linguist, or philosopher on the team, not necessarily someone with training in all of the disciplines, which they believe would be both impossible and useless. Because it's often the conjoining of the disciplinary conversation that makes for the best work. Louis Menand's book, Ideas in the Marketplace, usefully reminds us not to let the specific anxieties over interdisciplinarity in one area of work, the humanities, overwhelm the force of good work there too. In such areas in the humanities as cultural, gender, and diasporic studies, translation studies, indeed even ancient studies, interdisciplinarity is strong and thriving. A time of fiscal crisis is, in my view, the worst possible moment to invent interdisciplinary programs that are, in fact, the gutted shells and stepchildren of graduate and undergraduate training in the disciplines. My all-time favorite, number 7. What are the liberal arts going to do about economic development and entrepreneurship? Or, as my student government representatives repeatedly ask, when will the liberal arts college start teaching a minor in business? The answer to the last question to the students is never. The perfectly reasonable request of legislators and citizens that public universities use their creative and scientific energies on behalf of economic development has, in some cases, led top-level university administrators to damage the liberal arts colleges in 3 significant ways. First, by ignoring them. Second, by involving them in conversations in which they honestly have little to contribute. See the above conversations. And third, by failing to understand their enormous vulnerability in exactly these difficult fiscal times. Liberal arts colleges and public universities cannot survive without some kind of preferential option that operates both ideologically and fiscally. To avoid being driven simply by the demands of either students or society, and by the way, these are the twin pressures, liberal arts colleges, unlike almost any others, need additional support from central resources. In this respect, the shift to so-called responsibility-centered management systems in university budgets has, and I'm sure in some places definitely has, had the potential and has in fact severely damaged the liberal arts. For a very compelling analysis of this, it's useful to read the CLA 2015 report from the Liberal Arts College at the University of Minnesota, a heartfelt and hard-minded view of the very, very difficult situation of the liberal arts at that wonderful public university. As important now more than ever, the liberal arts colleges must feature in the comments of academic leadership, frankly because we are less self-justifying in the current moment than those schools focused on solutions to practical problems. There are numerous sources for these arguments. Ironically, the Taylor book, which I don't agree with on interdisciplinarity, has a very useful analysis of the value of liberal arts education. Martha Nussbaum's new book, which links liberal education powerfully to citizenship, not for profit, is a wonderful source of the ideas about defending the liberal arts. But the discursive point that needs to be made, and this needs to be made sadly often on our own campuses, not necessarily beyond that, is the error of preparing students for today's crisis rather than for the world that is yet to come. And the crucial way that the liberal arts aspires to do just this. And the most powerful voice in this conversation on our own campuses will always be the liberal arts college itself, that speaks with authority because it has sorted out its internal issues, built a moral community around a balanced approach to teaching and research, demonstrated the power of that view in the lives of its faculty and students, and ceaselessly made the point of its importance on its campus and beyond.